The scream cut through the music like a blade. Not a scream of pain. Something worse. The kind that rips out of your throat when your brain can't process what your eyes are seeing. Priya Nolan set her champagne glass down slowly. Across the Meridian Grand Ballroom, Chicago's most exclusive venue, the kind of place where a table cost more than most people's cars, every conversation had stopped. Every head turned toward the entrance. And Priya understood why. Danny Osei was standing at the top of the curved marble staircase. Danny, who cleaned Priya's bathrooms, who ironed Priya's blouses, who had spent the last 7 months on her knees scrubbing grout from Priya's kitchen tiles for $14 an hour. That Danny, standing in a dress that made every woman in the room look like they'd dressed in the dark. Ivory silk. Not white ivory. The kind of color that exists only in certain light, shifting like water. Thousands of hand-stitched glass beads ran from the neckline down to the floor in cascading rivers. The cut was architectural, precise, the kind of precision that doesn't come from a machine. Is that? Someone behind Priya breathed, then stopped. That's an Adiz original, a man said. His voice broke on the last word. I covered the Adiz runway show in Milan. That dress. That's the dress. From the closing night. That dress isn't for sale, a woman whispered. It was never for sale. The family keeps all the closing pieces. Priya felt the floor tilt beneath her heels. No. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. 3 days earlier, Priya had been standing in her walk-in closet with 2 of her closest friends, Jade Moreau and Skylar Fitch, watching Danny fold a cashmere throw on the bed in the next room. I have an idea, Priya had said, in a voice loud enough to carry. She'd walked to the bedroom doorway. Danny. A pause to make sure Jade and Skylar were positioned behind her. I'm hosting a table at the Meridian Gala on Saturday, the charity event. You've probably seen the invitations on my desk. Danny had looked up, brown eyes steady. She never reacted too much, which Priya had always found irritating. Tickets are $8,000 each, Priya continued. I've decided to give you one. A silence stretched. It's exclusive. Everyone who matters in this city will be there. I thought you deserved a night out. She'd let the smile sit long enough to sting. Wear whatever you have. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate. She turned back to her friends. They'd made it to the hallway before the laughter started. Quiet, vicious. A sound Priya would later wish she could take back. Did you see her face? She's going to show up in something from Target. The whole room is going to know she's the help. Behind the half-closed bedroom door, Danny had stood very still folding the cashmere throw. Her hands moving on habit while her mind moved somewhere else entirely. She'd let the laughing voices fade down the hallway. Then she'd set down the throw, walked to her bag, pulled out her phone, stared at a contact she hadn't called in 6 months. Pressed call. Mama, she said when the line picked up, I need the ivory dress. Here's what Priya Nolan didn't know about the woman scrubbing her floors. Danny Osei's mother was Adiz Osei. If you didn't recognize that name, you weren't in fashion. Adiz had built one of the most respected design houses in the world from a single rented studio in Lagos. By the time Danny was 12, Adiz gowns were on Grammy stages and royal balconies. By the time Danny was 16, museums were requesting pieces for permanent exhibitions. By 20, Adiz's work had been on the cover of every major fashion publication on 3 continents. Danny had grown up inside that empire. Private schools, apartments in London and New York, front row seats at every show, a name that opened doors so fast, she'd never once had to knock. And that was the problem. At 24, Danny had realized she didn't know who she was without the name. Every friendship, every opportunity, every room she'd ever walked into. It had all come through the door of being Adiz's daughter. She couldn't separate herself from the inheritance. Couldn't know if anything she'd built was actually hers. So she'd made a deal with her mother. 1 year. Completely anonymous. No access to family accounts. No using the Osei name. A real job in a real city starting from nothing, to find out who Danny was when the name was stripped away. Her mother had cried. Then agreed. One condition. If Danny ever truly needed her, She would be there within 24 hours. Danny had chosen Chicago, found the housekeeping agency, moved into a studio apartment with secondhand furniture and a mattress that was too soft. She'd learned what tired felt like in her feet. She'd learned what it meant to be invisible, to stand in a room and have people look past her, through her, around her, people like Priya Nolan who spoke to her the way you speak to a piece of furniture. She'd planned to finish the year. Then Priya had stood in the doorway with that smile, and everything had changed. Danny stared at her phone after the call ended. She'd given 7 months to this experiment. She'd proven what she needed to prove. Time to remember who she was. The package arrived 18 hours later. Not by courier van. By a black car with a driver who buzzed the apartment intercom and handed her a sealed garment case, followed by 4 more people. Her mother's head stylist, 2 assistants, a makeup artist, all of them carrying black cases of their own. "Your mother sends her love?" the stylist said, unzipping the main garment bag. "And her best work." The ivory dress came out like a living thing. It shifted in the apartment light, the glass beads catching and scattering every photon in the room. Danny had seen it once before, on the runway in Milan under stage lights, as the closing piece of her mother's most acclaimed collection. Critics had called it architectural poetry. A museum in Amsterdam had offered to buy it. Her mother had declined. And now it was here, in a studio apartment with second-hand furniture. Because Priya Nolan had wanted to see a housekeeper embarrass herself. There was a note in the garment case, handwritten. "You were never invisible. You were just choosing to be quiet. Come home when you're ready. Mama." Danny folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she sat down in the chair they'd set up by the window and let them get to work. 5 hours later, she looked in the mirror. The woman looking back didn't look like a housekeeper. Didn't look like Adi's daughter playing dress-up. Didn't look like anyone's idea of anything. She looked like herself. Finally, fully herself. She picked up her bag and walked out. Back in the ballroom, Danny descended the marble staircase. The crowd parted not on purpose, not with any intention. The way crowds part when something moves through them that they don't quite know how to stand next to. Phones came up. Voices dropped. Someone near the bar actually dropped their drink. Priya was frozen. Jade had reached out and grabbed her wrist without realizing it. Danny crossed the ballroom floor like she'd been crossing ballroom floors her whole life, which she had. She moved through the parted crowd with no urgency, no performance, no anger on her face. Just a calm so complete it was almost unsettling. She stopped in front of Priya. "Mrs. Nolan." Her voice was warm. "Thank you so much for the invitation. This was incredibly generous of you." Priya's mouth moved. No sound. "You told me to wear whatever I had." Danny touched the dress once, lightly, at the waist. "I hope this is appropriate." Somewhere behind Priya, a man laughed. One sharp burst of startled sound, quickly swallowed. Jade had let go of Priya's wrist. Her voice was barely a breath. How did you, that dress?" "I know that dress. That's from the Adi's Milan show. My mother made it." The words dropped into a silence so complete that half the ballroom heard them. Jade's voice cracked. "Your mother is Adi's?" Danny tilted her head slightly. "Adi's Ose. Perhaps you've heard of her." Then the room erupted. Not all at once. In waves. A gasp. Then a ripple. Then the full roar of 200 people simultaneously processing the same impossible information. Priya stood at the center of it like a woman in the eye of a storm, and unlike storms, this one wasn't moving around her. This one was looking directly at her. Priya found out what it felt like to become invisible inside of 20 minutes. The conversations that stopped when she approached. The eyes that slid away. Jade had walked off without explanation. Skylar was on the far side of the room having what looked like an animated, horrified conversation with someone Priya didn't recognize. Meanwhile, Danny was surrounded. Fashion editors. Executives from brands Priya had been trying to get meetings with for 2 years. The chairwoman of the charity. The venue owner. All of them leaning in, laughing, touching the dress, asking questions. Danny answered each one like she had all the time in the world. Priya's husband found her against the far wall. Nate Nolan was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. 43 years old, built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up, the kind of man who communicated everything essential without changing his expression. He leaned in close. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "I didn't know who she was. You invited our employee to a charity gala as what, a social joke? And she turns out to be Adiz Osei's daughter." He paused. "That's not a sentence I expected to say tonight. I didn't know. You were cruel to her for 7 months without knowing." His voice didn't change. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Priya said nothing. The Osei family has business relationships with every major development firm in Europe and 3 of the largest commercial real estate funds in the world. Nate's jaw was tight. Adiz Osei personally sits on the board of 2 major foundations that we have been trying to partner with for 18 months. "Do you understand what you've done?" Priya's throat closed. "Fix it," Nate said. "Tonight. Or tomorrow you'll be fixing it without my name." He straightened his jacket, walked away, and Priya stood there, alone in the middle of the most exclusive gala in Chicago, for the first time in her adult life understanding what it felt like to take up space in a room and wish you didn't. She waited until the crowd around Danny had thinned. Then she crossed the room. She walked the same marble floor she'd walked 100 times at events like this, but it had never felt this long before. "Danny," she kept her voice steady by force of will. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Danny excused herself from the conversation she was having, gracefully, without showing anything on her face. She followed Priya to a quiet alcove near the back of the room. Priya had prepared words. They evaporated. "I'm sorry," she said instead. Just that. Raw and graceless and real. "What I did, the invitation, the way I said it, I was trying to humiliate you. I've treated you badly for 7 months. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. "Why?" Danny said. "Why what? Why were you cruel to me?" Her voice carried no accusation. Genuine question. Priya opened her mouth. The honest answer was embarrassing in its smallness. "Because I thought you couldn't do anything about it. Because you were safe to be cruel to." She didn't have to say it out loud. Danny watched her face and understood. "That's what I thought," Danny said quietly. "You weren't cruel to me because of anything I did. You were cruel because you assumed you could be. Because you thought I had no power." She paused. "That's the thing about people who only treat others well when there's something to gain. The moment the mask slips, everything's visible." Priya couldn't meet her eyes. "I believe you're sorry," Danny said, and her voice, impossibly, was soft. "I forgive you, Priya, but I need you to understand what tonight actually was. Not what happened to me, what it showed about you. That's the part you have to carry." She said it the way you tell someone a hard truth, not to punish them, but because leaving them in ignorance would be its own kind of cruelty. Priya nodded. Her eyes burned. Danny returned to the party. Priya stayed in the alcove for a long time. 2 days later, Danny was boxing up her studio apartment. It was a small operation. She'd arrived with almost nothing and accumulated very little. 7 months of plain furniture, secondhand dishes, shoes that didn't match what she was used to. She'd been surprised, over time, by how much she didn't miss. The money, the name, the ease of every door opening. She hadn't missed any of it. She'd missed her mother's voice, the smell of the design studio, the specific kind of joy that came from watching someone put on a dress that made them feel like themselves for the first time. A knock at the door. Priya Nolan stood in the hallway. No designer outfit. No blowout. Just a woman in jeans and a simple coat. Her face a little older looking than it had been 2 days ago, in the way that some kinds of honesty age you. "I know you're leaving," Priya said. "I just wanted to say goodbye. Properly." Danny stepped back to let her in. Priya stood in the middle of the small apartment and looked around. At the second-hand furniture. The single plant on the windowsill. The neatly stacked boxes. "You really lived like this," she said. Not with pity. Something more like awe. "The whole time. That was the point." "What did it teach you?" Priya asked. And for the first time, it wasn't a performance. It was a real question from someone who genuinely needed to know. Danny was quiet for a moment. That dignity doesn't come from the outside. Everyone I know from my old life moves through the world assuming they deserve to take up space because they were told to, because the world confirms it. But that assumption gets tested when it's removed. She picked up a stack of books and placed them in a box. I learned that I still knew who I was without the name. That was the real question. That's what I came here to answer. Priya sat down on the edge of the stripped mattress. I've been doing things differently this week, she said quietly. Small things. Noticing the way I talk to people I think don't matter. A pause. I had a lot of noticing to do. I know. I want to be better. Priya's voice was barely audible. I don't know how to become that without someone telling me I was terrible first. Danny smiled, the first real smile she'd offered her. Most of us don't. That's what this whole thing was about. After Priya left, Danny sealed the last box. She stood in the empty apartment for one moment, looked at the walls where she'd spent 7 months becoming someone she'd always almost been. Then she picked up her bag and walked out without looking back. The Invisible Line collection launched 8 months later. Paris. Private venue near the Seine. The guest list included fashion editors, artists, celebrities who moved between continents like weather. Adiz stood at the door greeting arrivals in a red dress that had taken 3 months to make. But in the front row, 50 seats had been reserved. 50 people who had never attended a fashion show in their lives. Housekeepers, nannies, hospital orderlies, personal assistants. All of them dressed, for tonight, in pieces from the new collection. The collection was built around a single premise. Every stitch of clothing in the line had been designed in collaboration with domestic workers. Women and men who had spent their careers making wealthy lives possible without being credited for any of it. A portion of every sale went directly into a scholarship fund for their children. Danny stood backstage as the show began. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the front row. Could see the faces of the housekeepers and assistants as the models came out. Her mother's work filtered through their stories. Some of them had their hands pressed to their mouths. A woman in the second seat from the left was quietly crying. Adiz appeared at her shoulder, took her hand without speaking. They stood there together and watched. After the show, the venue opened for mingling and Danny moved through the room, talking to the women from the front row, learning names and histories she should have been learning all along. Somewhere in the crowd, she spotted a face she hadn't expected to see. Priya Nolan had flown to Paris. She was standing near the back, holding her champagne glass with 2 hands, looking at the exhibition panels along the walls. Photographs of domestic workers from 15 countries, each one captioned with their name, their years of service, their dream for their children. She'd been looking at one panel for a long time. Danny walked over. "You came," she said. Priya turned. Her eyes were red at the edges. "I needed to see it." She gestured at the room, at the front row women still laughing with each other, at the collection, at the photographs. "I needed to see what you built from what I tried to break." Danny stood beside her and looked at the panel Priya had been studying. A photograph of a woman in her 50s, a hotel housekeeper for 22 years. The caption read, "She put 3 children through college. None of them know how hard it was." "That night," Priya said slowly, "when you walked into that ballroom, I thought you came to destroy me. I know, but you didn't. You could have." Her voice was quiet. "You had every reason to, and you didn't. Destroying you wasn't the point," Danny said. "The point was that the room needed to see what it looks like when you assume someone is less than you, and you're wrong. Not wrong because she turned out to be somebody famous." She paused. "Wrong because she was always somebody. Before the dress, before the name. She was somebody because she was a person. That's all it takes." Priya looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded, the slow, deliberate nod of someone filing something permanent. "I'm volunteering now," she said, "at a workforce training center. It's uncomfortable in ways I didn't anticipate." A breath. "I keep realizing how small my world was." "That discomfort is good," Danny said. "Stay with it." They stood side by side in front of the photograph for another quiet moment. "Thank you," Priya said finally. For not being what I expected. For being someone worth learning from even when I didn't deserve it. Danny picked up 2 glasses from a passing tray and handed one over. We're all works in progress, she said. Every single one of us. They touched glasses. The photograph watched from the wall. A woman who had put 3 children through college without anyone knowing how hard it was. Danny made a note to find out her name. Her real name. And make sure it was somewhere permanent. She flew home the next morning. Her mother was asleep when she got in. It had been a long week. Danny moved quietly through the apartment, past the design studio with its bolts of fabric and pinned patterns and the singular organized chaos that she had grown up inside. She stopped in the doorway of the studio. On the dress form near the window, her mother had pinned a sketch. New collection. The pencil lines were fast, intuitive, the way Adiz worked when something was pouring out of her that she couldn't stop. Along the bottom of the sketch, in her mother's handwriting. For the girl who went away and came back herself. Danny stood there in the doorway for a long time. Not because she was sad. Not because she was nostalgic. Because it occurred to her, clearly, and for the first time, that she had never once, in 7 months of living without her name, stopped being herself. The name could be removed. The money could be removed. The access and the ease and the open doors, all of it gone. And she had still been Danny. That was the answer she'd gone looking for. She finally had it. The measure of who you are isn't what you have. It's who you remain when everything is taken away, and how you treat the people who never had anything to begin with.